The Capitol was buzzing more than usual that day, but the tension was palpable in the marble-lined halls of the Supreme Court. Rumors had been swirling for weeks, whispers of a bold, unprecedented legal move that could shake the very foundation of the Trump administration. At the heart of the storm was a move by Justice Amy Coney Barrett, the conservative jurist who had quickly risen to a position of immense influence. The target of Barrett's latest gambit? None other than Karoline Leavitt, the formidable White House press secretary known for her sharp intellect, unwavering loyalty to President Donald Trump, and her ability to hold her ground against the most aggressive media onslaughts. What most Americans didn't know yet was that Barrett had quietly filed a motion behind closed doors, aimed at suspending Karoline Leavitt's term as press secretary. The reasoning was framed under the guise of constitutional protocol, questioning Leavitt's capacity to maintain impartiality in communications, and citing vague claims about conflicts of interest related to her previous political affiliations. It was a thinly veiled attempt to undermine her position and destabilize the messaging power of the White House. The story broke first in conservative circles, deliberately leaked by factions within the deep state who feared Leavitt's rising influence and her unflinching defense of the Trump administration's policies. Inside the West Wing, the news hit like a thunderclap. President Trump was livid. Who authorized this? Trump demanded from the Oval Office, pacing back and forth. This is a total political attack. Karoline's been our rock through every crisis. This is a witch hunt. Karoline, meanwhile, was preparing for the White House press briefing later that afternoon, unaware of the legal storm about to descend upon her. She was known for her poise and professionalism, even when the press tried to bait her with hostile questions. But today, something felt different. A subtle electric charge hung in the air, an unseen force tightening around the West Wing corridors. The Supreme Court was set to hear oral arguments on the motion that afternoon. The country held its breath, watching as the judiciary stepped into a political battlefield. Karoline's closest advisors urged caution. Karoline, this is a serious challenge. Amy Coney Barrett has the respect of the court, and this could delay or even remove you from your role, her chief of staff warned. You need a strategy. But Karoline wasn't about to back down. As the hearing commenced, Amy Coney Barrett presented her case with the sharp precision and calm demeanor that had made her a formidable presence on the bench. Ms. Leavitt's role as press secretary, while inherently political, demands adherence to certain impartiality standards, Barrett argued, her voice steady but firm. There is credible concern that her previous activities may compromise the administration's ability to communicate transparently and fairly to the American public. Barrett's argument was laced with subtle insinuations about Leavitt's political past, carefully crafted to suggest that the White House's messaging had been skewed and that the public deserved better. But then, something unexpected happened. Karoline Leavitt herself was granted permission to deliver a response. The courtroom was filled with an uneasy silence as she stood. Radiating calm confidence, she began, Justice Barrett and esteemed members of the court, the role of White House press secretary is inherently political. There is no impartiality expected beyond the truth of the administration's policies and positions. To suggest otherwise is to misunderstand the very nature of our constitutional democracy. Her words carried the weight of both conviction and clarity. She continued, My loyalty is to the American people and to the truth. I have always presented facts transparently and have never allowed personal affiliations to influence my duties. Attempts to remove me based on politically motivated accusations threaten the very principle of free speech and the separation of powers. The courtroom watched, riveted. Karoline's calm and articulate rebuttal struck a chord that seemed to resonate beyond partisan lines. Her refusal to be intimidated, her unapologetic defense of her role, left even some of Barrett's staunchest allies silently reassessing the strength of the motion. When Karoline finished, there was a moment of stunned silence. Amy Coney Barrett, for the first time since taking the bench, seemed momentarily speechless. The silence in the Supreme Court chamber was heavy and telling. For a moment, Amy Coney Barrett's poised, methodical facade flickered as Karoline Leavitt's words echoed in the grand hall. Reporters and political insiders alike, watching live from every corner of the nation, sensed something unprecedented was unfolding. The motion to suspend Karoline's term was no longer just a legal argument. It was a high-stakes political showdown that symbolized a deeper battle for control over the narrative of the Trump administration. Back in the White House, the atmosphere was electric. Staffers gathered around televisions in the press briefing room, eyes glued to the live feed, marveling at Karoline's performance. Even some reporters, typically skeptical or hostile to the administration, nodded quietly in recognition of her command of the moment. President Donald Trump, watching from the Oval Office, had a grin that wouldn't quit. "That's my girl," he said with pride. "Nobody takes Karoline down. She's too smart, too tough." As the hearing concluded, the Supreme Court justices retired to deliberate. The nation waited, holding its collective breath, and in the meantime, Karoline knew the battle wasn't over. The legal maneuver was just one front. Political opponents and media critics would likely double down, trying to paint her as a divisive figure, hoping to erode public trust in the administration's communications. Yet Karoline was ready. She had prepared meticulously for this moment, drafting statements, rallying support from key Republican leaders, and reaching out to influential conservative media outlets to amplify her message. Her resolve was not just about defending her own position, but about standing up for the principle that the White House's messaging must be free from intimidation, censorship, and politically motivated attacks. The next day, Karoline held an emergency press briefing that electrified the media landscape. "Let me be clear," she said, looking directly into the cameras with unwavering confidence. "Attempts to undermine the White House press secretary based on political vendettas threaten the very foundation of our democracy. I will continue to serve President Trump and the American people with honesty, transparency, and integrity." She was calm, clear, and unapologetic. Exactly what the administration needed. Meanwhile, inside the Supreme Court chambers, Justice Barrett found herself grappling with a growing wave of criticism. Conservative legal scholars began to question whether this motion was politically motivated and if it threatened to set a dangerous precedent for judicial interference in executive branch communications. The delicate balance of powers was being tested in real time. Senators on Capitol Hill caught wind of the unfolding drama. Some Republicans rallied behind Karoline, praising her steadfast defense. A few moderate Democrats voiced concern over what they called judicial overreach, fearing this case might erode the independence of the executive branch. In a rare moment of bipartisan consensus, a small group of senators issued a joint statement. "The role of the White House press secretary is inherently political and crucial for transparent communication. We urge the Supreme Court to respect the constitutional boundaries and allow Ms. Leavitt to fulfill her duties without unwarranted interference." The political earthquake was rippling through Washington. At the same time, social media exploded. Supporters of President Trump flooded platforms with hashtags like #StandWithKaroline and #PressFreedomNow. While detractors questioned the administration's messaging strategy, Karoline's poised rebuttal had transformed her from a behind-the-scenes strategist into a national symbol of resilience and free speech. But the question remained, would the Supreme Court side with Coney Barrett's motion and suspend her term? Or would Karoline's powerful defense hold firm, preserving her place at the heart of the Trump administration's communications? Inside the Supreme Court's marble walls, the tension was mounting. The days following Karoline Leavitt's courtroom defense felt like an eternity in Washington. Every news cycle dissected her words. Every political pundit debated the implications. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court prepared to announce its decision, a verdict that could redefine the relationship between the judiciary and the executive branch. Inside the chambers, Coney Barrett was no longer just a jurist weighing legal nuances. She was a symbol of the conservative judicial philosophy, tasked with balancing her strict interpretation of the law with the extraordinary political pressures mounting around this case. Barrett convened with her fellow justices behind closed doors. Some expressed concern over the political ramifications of suspending a key figure in the White House's communication strategy. Others pressed on the need to preserve what they saw as constitutional checks and balances. It was clear that the ruling would not be unanimous. Meanwhile, Karoline was not idle. She met privately with influential senators, allies in the administration, and top legal experts to strategize the next moves regardless of the court's decision. The stakes were high. If suspended, she could be replaced by someone less fierce, less prepared to fight back. On the day of the ruling, the nation tuned in with bated breath. Media outlets from coast to coast broadcast the proceedings live, commentators speculating on the possible outcomes, as the Chief Justice took the bench to deliver the opinion. The courtroom was filled with a mix of tension and anticipation. Cameras caught every expression on Amy Coney Barrett's face, which was calm but resolute. The ruling, when read, sent shockwaves through Washington in a split decision. The Supreme Court rejected the motion to suspend Karoline Leavitt's term. The majority opinion underscored that while the judiciary holds immense power, it must respect the political nature of executive communications roles. The court stated that suspending a White House press secretary based on allegations of impartiality crossed the line into political interference. Barrett, dissenting, voiced concerns about maintaining the integrity of the government's communications, but her minority opinion was outweighed by the majority's emphasis on preserving executive autonomy. The ruling was a decisive win for Karoline and the Trump administration. Immediately following the announcement, President Trump tweeted, "Justice served. Karoline Leavitt is a true patriot and a fighter for America. No one will silence her or this administration." In the West Wing, Karoline emerged from the legal battle more emboldened than ever. She delivered a press briefing that same afternoon, turning the courtroom victory into a rallying cry. With this ruling, the Supreme Court has reaffirmed the principle that the executive branch must remain free to communicate openly with the American people, she declared. "I thank the court for recognizing the political nature of this role, and I pledge to continue serving with honesty and courage." Her words resonated widely. Supporters praised her resilience, while critics begrudgingly acknowledged her skill. But beneath the surface, the fight had only just begun. Amy Coney Barrett, clearly unsettled by the ruling, began quietly rallying legal scholars and conservative activists who shared her concerns. Private meetings and think tank discussions emerged, debating the future of executive communications and the limits of judicial oversight. Meanwhile, in political circles, some Democrats saw an opportunity to push for reforms on transparency and accountability within White House messaging. They began drafting proposals for new legislation aimed at setting clearer boundaries, proposals that would inevitably face stiff resistance. Karoline, sensing the growing storm, intensified her efforts. She doubled down on training her communications team, strengthening relationships with key media figures, and ramping up her social media presence to connect directly with the American public. Her strategy was clear. Stay visible, stay unshakable as the country absorbed the aftermath of the court's decision. Karoline Leavitt had transformed from a press secretary under siege to a symbol of resilience and unwavering dedication to her role. Her ability to leave Amy Coney Barrett speechless was no longer just a courtroom moment. It had become a defining moment in the Trump administration's battle for control over America's political narrative. With the Supreme Court decision behind her, Karoline Leavitt found herself at the epicenter of a media storm unlike anything she had experienced before. The victory had not only solidified her position but also thrust her into the national spotlight as a figure of resilience against judicial and political pressure. Her phone was ringing off the hook with interview requests, from conservative talk shows to mainstream cable news programs. Each appearance was a chance to shape the narrative, to connect directly with Americans who were hungry for clarity amidst the chaos of political warfare. Karoline's message was consistent. "This is not just about me. This is about preserving the constitutional balance of power, protecting the right of the executive branch to communicate honestly with the people, and defending the fundamental freedoms that make America strong." Her poise and determination drew admiration from allies and even some skeptics. She quickly became a polarizing figure, loved by supporters who saw her as a fighter for truth, and criticized by opponents who labeled her a propaganda machine for the Trump administration. Behind the scenes, her communications team worked tirelessly. They coordinated a series of carefully planned campaigns that would amplify Karoline's voice and counteract the relentless attacks from political adversaries. Social media became a battlefield. Hashtags like #KarolineUnstoppable and #FreeThePressSecretary trended nationally. Viral videos of her courtroom defense and speeches flooded platforms, energizing grassroots supporters and fundraising efforts. But Karoline knew the fight for public opinion was delicate. The opposition was relentless, employing disinformation and smear tactics to try to tarnish her reputation. One particularly vicious claim surfaced, suggesting that Karoline had manipulated press data to favor the administration. The accusation was baseless, but it gained traction among certain media outlets. Karoline's response was swift and transparent. She held an emergency press conference, presented clear evidence debunking the claims, and invited independent journalists to review her team's work. Her openness turned the tide once again, earning her respect even from some critics. Meanwhile, Coney Barrett's camp was not idle. They launched a series of think tank reports and opinion pieces in conservative journals, questioning the Supreme Court's decision and warning of what they called unchecked executive power. A growing faction within conservative legal circles argued that while Karoline had won the battle, the war over executive communication standards was far from over. They called for new legislation to define limits and ensure transparency. The political battlefield extended to Congress, where debates heated up over proposed bills addressing press secretary responsibilities and limits on executive communications. Karoline was invited to testify before a Senate committee. Her testimony was watched by millions. In the hearing room, Karoline spoke with the same calm conviction that had silenced a Supreme Court justice. "My role is to be the voice of the administration," she said, "but that voice must be grounded in truth, transparency, and service to the American people. We must resist efforts to politicize and weaponize communications roles because that threatens democracy itself." Her words resonated across party lines. Even some Democrats acknowledged her professionalism and dedication, though they remained wary of the administration's broader messaging strategy. The hearing ended with no immediate legislative changes, but the debates set the stage for future battles. Back in the White House, President Trump publicly praised Karoline's testimony, tweeting, "Karoline Leavitt is the best press secretary this country has ever seen, fighting for America every day." Karoline's place at the heart of the administration was now cemented, not just by her legal victory, but by her growing reputation as a skilled communicator and a resilient leader. As the dust settled from the courtroom battle and the subsequent political storm, Karoline Leavitt found herself standing at the crossroads of history and her own career. The attempt to suspend her term had ignited a firestorm, but it had also launched her into a new level of influence and visibility, both within the White House and across the nation. In the weeks that followed, Karoline was more than just the president's press secretary. She became a symbol of tenacity, an embodiment of the fight to preserve the executive branch's voice in an era of intense partisan scrutiny. The Trump administration capitalized on this momentum, using Karoline's story as a rallying point to energize their base. At rallies, President Trump often referenced the Supreme Court's decision and Karoline's courtroom victory as examples of the administration's resilience against what he framed as relentless political attacks. "Karoline showed America what it means to fight back," he told a packed crowd in Florida. "She's not just speaking for me. She's speaking for every American who believes in freedom and truth." Yet Karoline remained focused, refusing to let the fame distract her from the demanding job at hand. Every day, she balanced the pressures of managing media relations, shaping messaging, and defending the administration's policies, now with an even greater spotlight. But the story didn't end with victory or acclaim. Karoline also understood the fragility of political power and the importance of legacy. She began quietly mentoring younger communications staffers, emphasizing the lessons learned from her ordeal: the need for preparation, integrity, and the courage to stand firm in the face of opposition. In private moments, she reflected on how the ordeal had changed her. What had started as a legal and political attack had transformed into a defining moment of personal growth and professional achievement. Meanwhile, Coney Barrett continued to influence conservative legal thought, though the episode remained a point of quiet contention. Both women, in their own ways, had shaped a critical chapter in the evolving story of American governance. In the months that followed, bipartisan discussions emerged about clearer boundaries between the judiciary and the executive, sparked in part by the unprecedented nature of the case involving Karoline Leavitt. While no sweeping reforms were immediately enacted, the case became a reference point for debates on constitutional interpretation, the independence of government branches, and the role of communications in modern politics. For Karoline, the biggest victory was the knowledge that she had defended not just her own position, but the principle that elected leaders and their representatives must be allowed to communicate directly with the people, without undue interference. Her story inspired countless Americans who valued free speech and government transparency. It was a testament to the power of conviction and the strength of standing your ground. As the Trump administration marched forward, Karoline Leavitt's name became synonymous with resilience, professionalism, and an unyielding commitment to the truth. leaving Amy Coney Barrett speechless and rewriting the script on what it means to serve at the highest levels of American politics. The battle had been fierce, the stakes enormous, but Karoline had emerged victorious. Not just in court, but in the hearts of many who believed in the enduring spirit of America.